Hi guys, take three. Hopefully this one will work. Hope wherever you are and whatever you're doing, you've had a great day. Tonight we're speaking on a confronting topic of children's body safety and how to introduce protective behaviours to young children. As parents, carers, and grandparents, we have the responsibility to empower and protect our children with the knowledge that their body is private and they have the right to protect their own privacy. This topic may be daunting for many parents and uncomfortable topic to discuss directly with your children. But the more light we bring to this dark topic, the better chance we have to make a difference and simply just to prevent it from happening. So as a disclaimer, we know it's a confronting topic, but we're actually doing this to help. The first important step on this journey is to understand the reality of childhood sexual abuse statistics. In an average Australian primary school class, it's hard to believe, but in the average class there's 22 children, but 2 girls and 1 boy will actually report being sexually abused before they are 15. I'm going to bring somebody actually into this conversation tonight. Let me see if I can actually now bring her in to the any second now. Let me just thanks for your patience, everyone. I think she's going to pop up any second. So the first important step in this journey is to understand the reality of childhood sexual abuse statistics. Hey Michelle, how you doing?
Good, thanks, Rach. How are you?
Yeah, working. And I was just saying, statistically, in an average Australian primary school class of 22 children, 2 girls and 1 boy report being sexually abused before they're 15, which is an alarming stat. So tonight we are speaking with Michelle Derrick, author of the highly successful behaviour book titled Only for Me. Michelle is a stay-at-home mum and mum to 4 children aged 3 to 13. She's one of our partners that provides articles for us this month. We're so excited to have you with us tonight. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm really excited to.
Yeah, we're really honoured to have you join us. And I'll just I know that we published your article earlier this month titled "Introducing Body Safety to Young Children" Part. If somebody has read the article, could you just give a little bit of an introduction and an overview? We're going to answer the 3 key questions, but before we go in, it gives a bit of an overview on what the article is about.
Yeah, so the article's just about how we begin those conversations with our children. So I'm breaking it down. So we're looking at why do we need to have these conversations with our children? We're looking at the way we go about that and the specific information that we want to impart to our children.
Yeah. And your book, Only for Me, as we were discussing just before online, it's a gentle rhyming book which teaches young children that their body is private and they have the right to protect their privacy. In another interview, we're going to be speaking about why and how I started to write that book. But since you've actually released it in July 2016, you've sold over 3,500 copies, which is incredible. And that's sort of global. That's not just here in Australia, globally, isn't it?
It is. It is. Yeah. Thank you. It's very encouraging.
But the other part, which I find completely incredible, is that part of your mission is that you donate 100% of the royalties organisations involved in preventing abuse and treating victims. So, so you've been doing that now for just over 2 years?
Yes. So since the book itself was released, I've been doing that. The journey, I guess, started several years before that, and it took a huge amount of research and consultation to make sure that I was producing a resource for parents that was going to comply with current recommendations, professional recommendations, as to how do we approach that subject. So now I really love sharing that information with other parents so they can be informed and know why we need to have these conversations and how to go about them.
And so the book has been endorsed by quite a few people. As kids, it's a resource of the Sydney hospital, the Children's Protection Unit. That's massive. That must have been a real like coup for you as well when that happened.
Yeah, it certainly was. Yeah, and that was really important that I got that endorsement with Act for Kids before I went to print, so that I knew absolutely 100% that, it was ticking all those boxes in terms of child protection. And yeah, certainly just, the fact that the Sydney Children's Hospital is using it, it's just, as I say, if there's only one child that it ever makes a difference for, it's worth it. But already, I've had some amazing feedback and testimonials and, really encouraging words from parents and teachers. So yeah, it's certainly been an amazing journey.
And just before we said three key questions as well, it's as I was explaining, we're aware that it's a very confronting topic, and that the stats are very, very high. But if parents that may have been victims themselves as well, that sometimes this going through this process with your own children can help. Have you found that in your experience, and since you've launched the book, that you've spoken to parents that they have been victims themselves, but they've thought to themselves, which is a little bit of your story, I guess, too, in the sense that you thought, well, maybe I don't need to speak to my children, but in actual fact, every parent needs to speak to their children about this topic. Is that right?
That's right, they do. And I think for those parents, it's certainly important that they know that they're doing all they can to protect their own children. But also I think it's a way of sort of processing what wasn't done for them as children. So to be able to give that back to the next generation, I think certainly helps with their healing.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's different phases and stages, I guess, if they have been victims themselves. Maybe getting a book is something that can help them equally themselves as well as their children. So we'll cover off on some of that sort of stuff on some of the other Facebook Lives soon. But let's get straight into these questions. Right. What do you reckon?
Yep, sounds good.
So the first question we have for you, Michelle, is you mentioned that parents have responsibility to have protective behaviour conversations with their young children. Can you tell us a little bit more about why that is the case?
Sure. So I guess ultimately, as parents, we are the primary educators of our children. And so part of that process, part of that responsibility as being primary educators, we want to keep our kids safe. So we want to make sure that we protect them from danger. We also help them to identify unsafe situations and how to react in those situations. So parents seem to be really good at doing it in terms of things like road safety. But when it comes to body safety, it's actually much more confronting, and unfortunately we don't do it quite so well. But when you actually understand the reality of childhood sexual abuse, I think you certainly understand that this is a conversation that we need to be having with our kids. So just to put it in context for you, your child this year is 100 times more likely to be a victim of sexual abuse than to be injured by a moving vehicle. So when we put it in that context, I think it really highlights that we absolutely need to be having these conversations with our children.
Is it more the fact that families and parents don't want to have to think obviously about this, and they just push it to the back of their mind, and it's a little bit too hard basket, too confrontational?
Sure.
Do you find that that's the case?
Absolutely. Well, that was my own experience, Rach. So when I went on this journey, I've got 4 children, as you said, and at the time that this journey started for me, I hadn't had very effective conversations with my children. In fact, I thought my son, who was 4 at the time, was too young. But in actual fact, that's not too young, because we need to be having conversations with our children from at least 3 years of age. And with my older 2, I had given them very basic, limited information. And that was for a couple of reasons. One was because I had a real sense of wanting to protect their innocence. I feel like our kids grow up so quickly in this very sexualised world. So I was holding on to that innocence. But also it was because I wasn't aware of the statistics, the reality of those, and I didn't feel equipped to have those conversations. Yeah.
Oh, a question just popped up on the Facebook feed. Hi, Joanne. At what age should we start having these conversations, and how young is too young?
Okay, well, I actually don't think that at any age is too young, because it's always going to be age appropriate. So I actually recommend that you definitely begin having the conversations with your children from 3 years, but I certainly know of some families who have done it with their children from as young as 2. It depends on the information, and it also depends on that you're going to impart, and it depends on your child. So we know that all our children grow and develop at different rates, and they have different level of maturity. So it's about understanding your child. And again, you just introducing it bit by bit in a very age-appropriate way. So it's certainly very different, the information that I give my 3-year-old compared to the information that I give my 8-year-old. So the answer is it's never too young.
So I think we're going to go into that a little bit in a moment, to different ways that you can communicate. But as you just said, so it's age-appropriate, and just know how to communicate that. And depending if it's a girl or boy too, because I mean, boys sometimes can sort of mature a little bit later than girls, would you say?
Well, yeah, I guess they can, but yeah, so it's more about just their ability, their control of language, for instance. So if you've got a 2-year-old that's, not speaking well, then obviously you're going to have to wait a little bit longer. And again, even 3-year-olds, sometimes it takes a while for their language to develop. So it's looking at the overall picture for them. But if you're going to sit down and read a book like Only for Me with them, you've got nothing to lose, because it's only going to help them to certainly introduce the topic, and it's going to make you feel more comfortable having that conversation when you start it from an early age.
And look, off the topic, not off the topic, but as a question, so you're talking about, having those conversations with your children, but as a parent, is there any tips that you've got, or maybe we can do this in another interview, but how parents can prepare themselves to have that conversation, to become more prepared themselves and be more comfortable? Is that something that we should do at a later stage, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. You need to be informed as a parent, and that's part of my mission. So at the moment, I'm running a lot of parent workshops where I'll go into schools and preschools and early childhood centres, and I'll actually teach the parents how to have the conversation with their children. I will explain to them what they actually need to impart to their child, but also how we go about it, and also some activities that you can do that will develop their problem-solving skills if they ever found themselves in a situation where they felt unsafe. So definitely Brave Hearts also have brought out a great information pack, which I believe you can download for free from their website, which also gives you some information as a parent as to how to go about those conversations.
Maybe,
but absolutely, you need to be informed.
In another Facebook, because
sure.
Yeah, that's another whole thing to speak about. But second question, should we get into it? Second question is, what are the key points to recognise in relation to sexual abuse statistics? So what are the key points to recognise?
Okay, so you mentioned earlier on that in an average Australian primary school class, we're looking at 2 girls and 1 boy reporting abuse. Okay, so those stats have actually come from the Australian Institute of Criminology's website, and they are conservative for 2 reasons. One is because they are just the tip of the iceberg, because we know so much abuse goes unreported, but also they're conservative because they only take into children up until the age of 15. So you'll actually find other stats that are even higher than that, because they'll look at children up to the age of 18. So it's important that you recognise the prevalence. However, the next step, which I think is really important for parents, is recognising what the breakdown is. So of those children that were being abused, that reported that abuse at the age of 15, only 10%, or it was 11%, of children were actually perpetrated by a stranger. So when we're having these conversations with our children, essentially, yes, we do need to cover off stranger danger, but stranger danger statistically is only relevant in about 10% of cases. And in the remaining 90% of cases, the child will actually know the perpetrator. So if we break down that further, which I think is definitely important that parents understand, in about 45% of those cases, the perpetrator was actually a person that was related to the child. So when we say that, it means that in 45% of those cases, the child was abused by either a parent, a step-parent, a grandparent, an auntie, an uncle, a cousin, or a sibling. So that's in half of those cases. In the other half, in about 47% of cases, the child was actually abused by someone otherwise known to them. So it could be an acquaintance or a neighbour, someone well known to, in the family. Yeah. So yeah, it's extremely shocking when you look at that breakdown, and those stats don't add up completely to 100% just because some perpetrators fit more than one category. So that's sort of the first breakdown, looking at how they're known to the victim. But the other really important thing is to look at the age of the perpetrator. And this is, I guess, part of my story, is that it was when I heard about young children being abused by children their own age that I suddenly recognised that, you know what, we have to be having these conversations with our kids.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I am.
When you say like the same age or just a little bit older or...
No, it can be the same age. So the two stories that I heard, in the first case, it was on the way home from a playdate at the park that the 7-year-old disclosed to his mum that the other young boy, who was 7, had been trying to touch him inappropriately while they played on the play equipment. And in the second case, it was a 9-year-old who the mother had sent to the toilets. Again, they happened to be at a park. And so when they had other children to look after, so when the 9-year-old needed to go to the toilet, she said, okay, go across with your friend, while they continued to watch the younger ones on the play equipment. And she suddenly sensed that something was wrong. And when she went over to the toilet, she discovered that her 9-year-old son was actually being abused by the other 9-year-old. Which is really shocking. What we do know that in the first case, the child had actually discovered inadvertently pornography on his iPad several months prior. And when the mother rang up to tell the other mother what had happened, she then disclosed that, and that whilst they'd put measures in place to stop the child accessing that material, they weren't aware of the fact that he was acting out because of what he'd been exposed to. And then in the second case, we know that the victim was the perpetrator was definitely a victim of trauma, because we know that all children that react in this way would have experienced trauma, and in a lot of cases, that traumatic event will be because they're actually being abused themselves, and that is very likely the scenario in the second case. So they were the stories that sort of inspired me to write the book initially. But as I continued my research, I then learn about more statistics, and one of those is that Bravehearts are now quoting that somewhere between 30 to 60% of all childhood abuse is being perpetrated by other children or young people. So either their peers or other young people, so that includes teenagers.
So realistically, people that the parents are not expecting whatsoever, you think, and as you said before, stranger danger, that people generally think that's going to be the main perpetrators, but when realistically, it's within our circle of family and friends, within our social circle.
Absolutely.
Also between children the same age.
Yeah, so it could be a play date, it could be while you're at the park, it could be at the swimming lessons. So it's about understanding that abuse is not necessarily going to occur in situations that you always thought, okay, that it's not always going to be behind a closed door. It can actually be while you're essentially supervising as a parent, and it can certainly be in these types of environments where you least expect it. So that's why we as parents need to educate ourselves about where the danger is.
Yeah, and to stop it from happening. And we stop it by educating the children on how to deal with situations when they're confronted, God forbid, by that situation. That leads into the third question here. You highlight that it's important not to just speak in general terms to our children, but to give them specific information. What specific information do you suggest parents teach their young children? So,
okay. Yep, so I've got quite a list here, so I'll run by it point by point. So this is a list that is basically covered throughout Only For Me, but regardless, it's definitely information that you want to teach your child. So in the first case...
These are listed in the article this month, aren't they?
They are, yep. So you can, So it's quite a lot of information to take in. But yeah, if you want to just have a look at that article, you'll see it all listed there. So the first point that all parents need to be doing is to make sure that they are using correct anatomical terms for their child's private parts. So with girls, we talk about vulva and vagina, and with boys, we talk about their penis and their testicles. Now, the reason is very simple, and that is simply because we do not want information to get lost in translation. So, for instance, when my son was young, he was taught the Lebanese word for his penis that his that my husband's grandparents had taught him. And at the time I thought, oh, this is a lovely, soft word. I feel much more comfortable using it. But as I've been on this journey, it was pointed out to me that if he had been at preschool and, as I said, in a situation where you least expect it, just playing with the kids in, perhaps the yard, and he went up to the teacher and said that, so-and-so was trying to touch my unjuicy, the preschool teacher is going to have no idea what he's talking about. So it's as simple as that. We've got to teach our kids the correct terms so that they can, so they have the correct language, which of course is also really important down the track if it was ever needed that, there was ever any forensic interviews conducted or any court cases. It is a much stronger case if the child's using those correct terms. So that's the number one thing you need to be make sure you're doing with your child. And if you're not doing it yet, it's okay. You can change that behaviour because, as I said, I'm speaking from experience that I've gone from using these other terms to actually making sure that we start using the correct terms. Okay, so once we've identified what our private parts are, we want to make sure that they understand that your private parts are not for touching or feeling. No one is allowed to do this, and they're not allowed to do it either through their clothes or direct touch. So that's really important, because what I'm trying to do is we're trying to disarm the predators of the tools and the techniques that they will commonly use during the seduction process. So the idea is if we're giving our kids specific information, they will actually hopefully recognise that grooming behaviour, and they'll come to us in the earlier stages rather than waiting until it's through direct touch. So it's giving our kids permission that even if it's through our clothes that someone is touching us and we don't feel comfortable about it, that it's still not okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so the next point is we want to reinforce to our children as well that they are not allowed to do any of those things because quite often a perpetrator will invite them to do that. And so it's just reinforcing that specific behaviour that no one is allowed to do that to them, and they are not allowed to touch or feel or look at anyone else's private parts either. Okay, so the next point is this is where we really start to disarm the predator of the tools that they're commonly using, particularly in this technological age. So we want to teach our kids that it's not okay if someone shows if someone takes a photograph of their private parts. This day and age, everyone has a mobile phone camera in their back pocket. So it's even more prevalent. So we need to let our kids know that that is not okay if someone wants to take a photo of their private parts or while they're, half dressed or naked. We also want to teach our kids about pornography. Now, this again, it's important we're doing this in age-appropriate way. So what we're actually going to do is we're just going to simply teach our little ones that it's not okay for anyone to show them pictures of private parts on any sort of device. And when we go through the book, we've got little pictures of an iPad and a phone and a computer, all the places that now it's not coming from in most cases, it's not going to be coming from a magazine. Like a generation ago, it's then going to be really graphic and explicit videos that are available online. So it's really, really important that we teach our kids that it's not okay for anyone to show them any of these images. And if they do, once again, it's teaching them the behaviour that they need to come and tell someone that they can trust if anyone does this
the question
to them.
Before we go to the next point, because there is a lot of information for the children to take in, do you suggest that you sort of do this in phases or in steps and over a certain period of time so it sinks in, or how do you suggest that the parents should be having these conversations, and so it does actually go in?
Okay. So many parents like me initially thought that this would be a conversation that's kind of a one-off. It's something that you can have with your children and feel, oh, thank goodness, you know, that's such a daunting subject. I'm glad I've done that. Yeah, exactly. But unfortunately, it's not a one-off conversation. It's a conversation that's going to evolve over time. It's going to change as your child grows. It's going to change as circumstances change. So, for instance, at the beginning of a new school year, the network of trust that you'll establish with your child as to who they can go to if they're ever concerned, that might need to be updated. But also with my 3-year-old, I say to him that it's okay if the teachers at preschool need to use toilet paper to help him when he goes to the toilet. But I don't, for my 8-year-old, I certainly say to him, nobody needs to touch. So it is definitely a conversation that evolves, that you will change, and you do have to revisit it. The idea behind Only For Me was that it was providing a resource that actually engages kids because it's written in rhyme. So bizarrely, kids actually enjoy reading it. I've had quite a few testimonies of parents who say it's one of, you know, the favourite bedtime storybooks. And it's been made in such a way so that the information that's actually contained within the book is completely child friendly. So I have information available on my website if parents want to know more about having these conversations, the statistics or the signs and indications to look for, but they're not part of the book. So it can actually be something that is available to the child whenever they feel like they want to go and you know, choose it as a bedtime story, or certainly bring up something with mum or dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely something that we need to revisit. My advice initially with parents is just to, if they were reading the book, is to read it through just from start to finish. And then the next time you read it, that's when you sort of stop and you start clarifying information. And you know, you might expand. And as I said, there's various sort of problem-solving activities that you can do with your child while you're having these conversations with them. But that all comes later, as you say. So yeah, absolutely, we want that to evolve.
Ongoing rolling conversation that you're having as they grow and as they develop. Yeah. Next
Absolutely.
Point, is teach children that it doesn't matter if someone tells them that it's a game, rewards them or gives them treats, presents or gifts. It's still not okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So once again, disarming the predators, and this is ridiculously common, that a perpetrator will actually essentially try and bribe the child with gifts to stop them from telling anyone what they're doing to them. So when we actually teach our children that that's not okay, and if anyone tries to offer them any of these things in exchange for inappropriate behaviour, recognise it straight away. Hang on, this is not okay. I need to tell someone. And then it's the same thing leading on to it's not okay if they threaten me. So I say to kids, even if they say that something bad's going to happen, you still must go and tell someone. So once again, disarming them of that tool that they would use. And that input into the book actually came from one of my friends who was an adult survivor of child abuse, and her father used to actually say, you know, if you tell your mum, then I'm going to do this to her. So it was really valuable getting her input, and that's why we've included it in there, just to disarm predators of that control that they try and have over the child. And then you come on to secrets, which is a really big topic in itself, and I hope to actually blog about that in its entirety, just as a separate issue. But just very briefly, we want our kids to know that abuse is never a secret, inappropriate behaviour is never a secret, and that if it is, then we need to tell someone that we can trust if someone ever tells them that. And as I said, I can sort of expand on that another time. Again, we want to highlight to our kids that it does not matter who the person is. So it does not matter if they are a stranger, if they are family, if they are a friend. It doesn't matter the age of the person. So whether they are the same age or a teenager or someone a little bit older or an adult. And it doesn't matter what that person's status is in the community. We don't want predators using their status or their job as justification for their behaviour. So once again, when we remind kids of this, we're taking away the power. So that's really important. So it doesn't matter the age, the relationship, the status in the community. I think that's the or the relationship to the child. So yeah, that's covered all those points off. We're getting through them. Okay, so this is a really important point that we want our kids to know, that they own their own bodies and that they can say no at any point that someone's touch doesn't feel right. So once again, it's about allowing our kids to come and disclose to us, even in the early stages of abuse. So it might be that it's a kiss or a cuddle or a snuggle or stroking my body, it could be a tickle. Whatever the behaviour is that makes them feel uncomfortable, they have the right to say no. And because they are the owners of their body, and they have the right to protect that privacy, and they need to again come and tell an adult or someone in that network of trust about the situation.
And I guess too, as a parent, as a grandparent, as a carer, I'm looking, if something doesn't feel right, and like you said, if it's maybe unbeknown is actually grooming the child, and maybe, like you said, he's maybe just tickling them, thinking that they're playing and they're giggling. But if that doesn't feel right as an adult looking and seeing that happening, it's usually not right. Would you say that's the scenario?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. And at the end of the day, regardless of the intent, that child has the right to say, please don't do that, I don't like it. And that's, again, another topic for later on as to how we actually empower kids to say no in the various ways they can say no. But again, yeah, we'll run out of time if we cover that off tonight. So at the final point, I'll just check over my notes here. We've covered secrets. Oh, one other really important point is that they're never to blame. So often a perpetrator, like, they're so manipulative that they will actually orchestrate it. So somehow the child will feel that they were actually part of the abuse, that somehow they either liked it or somehow they instigated it or they agreed to it. And so the children will often feel that real sense of that they're to blame or that they're at fault. So again, it's teaching our kids that even if you feel that somehow it's your fault, it's still not okay. You're not in trouble. That's really important, teaching them that no matter, even if they feel like they're to blame, they're still never in trouble, and that they need to come and tell, again, the adult or in that network of trust. Ideally for me, it's mum and dad. And I think that pretty much covers off. Just running through the final notes. Yeah, really, so that's pretty much it.
Go.
Sorry, Dan, just the final part. So that's sort of the specific information that we want to impart to the children, which seems extremely, overwhelming. I understand that. But if you are, wondering how you can do this, please feel free to have a look at, I've got a full preview of my book on Only For Me on the website, that there is actually a way to do this, that in a way that is gentle, and in a way that's dignified, and in a way that doesn't seem overwhelming for the child. And at the end of it, you want to be talking to your kids as to establishing who those 5 adults are. So whilst if you're having this conversation with your child, obviously you want them to come to you, but you have to recognise that in some situations you may not be available, and so you definitely want to give your kids some other options as to who they can talk to if there was ever an issue.
Yeah. And so we've covered off, this is only part 1 that we've already published, introducing body safety to young children, part 1. So we're going to be publishing part 2 next month in November.
Yep.
And we're doing another Facebook Live and sort of discussing those key points as well. We've covered off a lot tonight, but I think there's, I mean, how would you recap the sort of we've spoken about tonight for somebody, I guess, that is only just coming to terms with maybe speaking to their children about this for the first time? How do you recap everything that was spoken about?
Sure. Look, I think as parents, we put so much pressure on ourselves. So be kind to yourself. If this isn't a topic that you've thought about before, it's okay, because I was one of those parents. So certainly just be gentle and kind to yourself. Certainly do some research when you feel that you're able to, that you feel comfortable doing it. Again, we know that it can be very confronting for people that have experienced abuse themselves, and that's somewhere around about 20% of parents, which is, a really high number. But, I think knowledge is power. So, once you know, then in your own time, you need to have a look at the resources that are available to you. And, whilst it's important that schools and preschools do cover these topics, sometimes they have incursions with people like Bravehearts or Act for Kids who'll come out and speak to the children. There is actually a real value in a parent sitting down and having that conversation with a child, because what can be imparted and taught in a group scenario is very different to sitting down one-on-one with your child. And it's also about developing that ability for them to feel comfortable to talk to you about it.
So I was just about to say that also, that then opens up the opportunity for them to feel comfortable, given the situation, to be able to then. Yes. Yeah.
And that lays the foundations for other conversations that we need to have with our kids down the track as they grow, when we talk about personal development, and then all the challenges facing our teenagers this day and age with, technology, all that opens up in terms of, sexting and pornography and all those issues. So when we have these conversations earlier on, then it certainly lays the foundations for those other conversations that we're going to need to have as they grow up, or too quickly.
Michelle, look, we're really, really honoured to have your time tonight and for all of your information and advice. If they've got any other further questions for you, whereabouts can they find you?
Yep, sure. So you can head to the website, which is onlyforme.com.au. So there's an inquiry form there, or if you're ready to write it down, you can contact me at contact@onlyforme.com.au. And I would very welcome, any feedback or comments or queries that anyone has.
Thank you so much for your time tonight, Michelle. And we'll speak to you hopefully very, very soon, next month, about part 2 then.
Awesome. That would be wonderful. Thanks so much, Rach.
Take care. Speak soon.
Okay. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.